Well, for loops are really great when you know exactly how many times you want to run the code. Sometimes the condition's a little bit more complex. Maybe it's not as straightforward. So here we have another type of loop, that's the while loop. So this will execute the block of code over and over as long as that condition is true. The condition is checked each time, specifically before each loop iteration. So it's possible for this loop to never run. If this condition isn't satisfied on that first try, same as the for loop, right? That is possible. If you initialize to something and it's immediately false, it won't run. Well, the while loop does the same thing. In fact, all these for loops could be rewritten as while loops. So I'll do that in one of the examples. Actually, I'll show you here. So let's say we wanted a while loop that ran 5 times, right? So all I would need to do is initialize a counter variable outside of the while loop. And then I'd put count or I, whatever I want to name it, is equal to 0. And then for the condition, I'd put count less than 5. This will do exactly the same as our first for loop example. But typically we don't use while loops for this, right? So it is possible to do the same thing as a for loop, but really, right, if we're trying to write our code properly, if we're trying to use the correct structures, follow conventions, when you have a straightforward repetition, one that's expected, predictable, then go with the for loop. Again, if the condition is a little bit more complex, you don't have a fixed count, then this is where the while loop kicks in. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have a while loop to check the status of a device's battery. So while loops are really good for polling values. Polling means you check them over and over again. So we have int battery is equal to 5, so we have 5% left on our battery. We're going to print out the battery percentage over and over again, as long as we have a battery value greater than 0. This is what this is saying. While the battery value is greater than 0, while it's a positive value, keep printing out the battery percentage. And then naturally at the end of each loop, right? So we don't have an update section for our while loops. These are a little bit more simple. You can do a decrement or increment inside the loop, typically at the very beginning or at the very end. I like to always throw my increment decrements at the end of my while loops. So yeah, here we have battery. So this kind of, right, could be written as a for loop, but for the sake of simplicity, right, this is going to be our first while loop example. So yeah, battery is going to go down each time it loops. So it's going to start off at 5. Is 5 greater than 0? Of course. So it's going to print out battery at 5%. And then the battery is going to go down to 4. So when we come back to the beginning of this loop, battery is now 4. 4 is still greater than 0, right? So it's going to repeat that over and over again. How many times will it repeat it? See if you can take a guess. Let's go ahead and check. This loop continues as long as the battery is greater than 0. Battery minus minus, like we said, indicates that the battery value is going to decrement by 1 after each iteration. Let's track the battery finally. All right, so let's see. So iteration 1, we have 5. Of course, it's greater than 0. So now our new battery value goes down. 4 is still greater than 0, so we go to the next one. 3 is still greater than 0, so we're satisfying that condition. We go down again. 2 is greater than 0, so we keep going. Well, 1 is greater than 0 too, so we keep going. Finally, we get to 0. Is 0 greater than 0? It's not. If this was greater than or equal to, then that would work, right? But this is a straight up just greater than. So 0 is not greater than 0. They're the same. So the sixth iteration does not execute, and this will actually repeat 5 times, just like the first example. But this a little bit more context, right? A little bit more complex because we're working with an actual variable that's meaningful instead of just like a counter, right? That doesn't really mean a lot to the program, although the counters can be useful. When you're working with more complex conditions, things that aren't so straightforward, go with the while loop. So I know this example isn't great when it comes to, hey, this is when you would use a while loop, because you could use a for loop for this. But in the next example, we'll use a more classic situation scenario where the while loop makes way more sense.